You are tuned in to the Grand Rising Experience, a journey into self-acceptance and forgiveness through the ancestral birth and earth stories that will forever transform your mess into your medicine. This is how we learn to heal and how we learn to be love. This is the Grand Rising Experience. I am willing to see things differently. This is found inside A Course in Miracles, and it's often been repeated by Marianne Williamson. And it's not only a statement, but a prayer. And a prayer to begin and use generously throughout your day. And it's definitely a phrase that's guided me for quite a while. Every aspect of your life is ruled by relationships. The health of your thoughts, words, and actions are always a direct reflection of your relationship with yourself, and your relationship with self is dictated by your relationship with God. And if you want to gauge where you stand with God, start by observing your thoughts and words in favor of policing the words and actions of another. Others do not owe you anything, and they do not owe it to you to think and act and respond like you, nor are they required to keep you comfortable. Your only job is to observe and monitor yourself and then shift accordingly. And the biggest gift you can give yourself is the gift of observation, the ability to witness how you are reacting physically, mentally, emotionally to any given situation, and then choose compassionate curiosity instead of defaulting to any of your pre-programmed responses. I am willing to see things differently. When we make a conscious effort to see things differently than they appear, we are ultimately making a declaration of peace and love. And it's a declaration because in order to see something differently, it means that you're accepting what is happening in the now moment and that you're actively choosing to be present. You are choosing not to see through the projection of fear or your wounding, past experiences, fear, anger, resentment, guilt, name the emotion, but instead see through the perspective of divine love, a conscious alignment with your authentic higher self. And that's the self that knows that we are not separate and that what I am seeing in you is a reflection of me, which is ultimately a reflection of God, which is always love. Your authentic higher self is love. Any other response is a fear-based, ego-driven response. And sadly, we live in a fear-based world that many of us are literally born into. Many of our birth stories dictate that we walk around armored and walled off. Fear runs rampant through our DNA, RNA, and governs the systems on how we enter this world. This is something that I talked about with Nathan Riley in episode 6. So if you haven't listened to that yet, it's definitely worth making time for. And we dive a little deeper into the mechanics of modern maternity and how that affects how we show up and who we become in this world. This is why I'm so passionate about cultivating curiosity about your ancestral birth and earth stories. And it's not so we can sit in our wounding, but so that we can honor our victim stories, which I have another great episode with Marina Valentina George. It's called Embracing Your Victimhood, and that's episode 4. And it's important that we embrace our victim stories so that we can accept how they have shaped our response to our internal and external worlds and forgive them so we can move closer into alignment with God. I am willing to see things differently. I've spent the past few years leaning into the shadowy parts of myself, really allowing myself to marinate in the darker aspects of my being. Not in a dark, sinister way, but in a curious and compassionate and loving way. It's been my greatest teacher, and it has become very obvious to me when I'm acting from my shadows versus acting from my lighter and higher self. And I recently had an in-depth reading of my birth chart with Stephanie Powers, and I'll link her info in the description. And my relationship with my shadow literally lights up my purpose in my birth chart. And the stars indicate that living and teaching through the wisdom of my shadow is the path to my greatest fulfillment. And it makes so much sense to me. The past 2.5 years of my life, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, has absolutely been ruled by my shadow. And it's the shadow that disconnects me from my divine feminine flow and plugs me directly into the toxic masculinity. And in the 3 years leading up to March of 2020, when the world went haywire, I had been willing to see things differently. And I was exploring what it meant to be in my feminine energy, and the relationships that were appearing in my life directly reflected that to me. And for the first time, I was consciously experiencing separation and duality. And the proverbial mirror had finally appeared, allowing God consciousness to flow freely into my life. But then 2020 hit, and I took a little nap. It was actually more like a lucid dream, in the sense that I had full awareness that I was allowing fear to drive my decisions and create trauma bonds. But I was allowing my nervous system to stay in a state of dysregulation, even though I knew better and I had all of the tools and resources to self-correct. And it was during this time I was still willing to see things differently. And it opened my eyes to an entirely new set of stories that exist in our world. But it closed off and fortified my heart in the process. I think anyone who's been through a dark night of the soul or any kind of awakening knows and understands that when you've lived in your shadow long enough, falling back into them is like relapsing back into an addiction. And for me, controlled chaos and all of the biochemical responses that come with it was my comfort zone. But it was not a representation of my authentic self. And because of the deep inner work I was doing prior, I was able to recognize this. And then once again, I was willing to see things differently. I could no longer ignore all of the red flags and stay out of right relationship with God, meaning I could no longer carry the weight of the armor of self-preservation, or ignore my body's call for rest, or stay disconnected and out of flow with my intuition and womb wisdom, or continue to seek security by attempting to control all aspects of my environment, which is what I was doing in a state of survival and self-preservation. So once again, I had to be willing to see things differently. And this is where things get interesting, because my journey over the past 2 years led me to the Bible and God in ways that I had never experienced before. And it really forced me to confront the dogma and the doctrine that society has constructed and which has acted as the middleman between us and God. And I really had to read and marinate in the words that were on the page of this book. And it had started as a highly intellectualized, lawful process, but it began to evolve into this embodied knowing that was calling me to reevaluate my path. And in divine timing, the why and the way was revealed to me. In February of 2022, the YouTube algorithm gods guided me to the book of Isaiah, the book of Jeremiah, and the book of Judges. And I have been revisiting them almost daily since then. And I don't want to spoil or taint your perception with mine. So I'm going to leave the links in the show notes to the intro videos that I first stumbled across. But know that they cracked open my heart and caused me to reevaluate the armor that I had been carrying up until that point. But what I will say is that it became obvious to me that there is no better place than here, that wherever you go, there you are, and that heaven on earth is already here, and it's just waiting for you to show up and claim it. And that claim can only be made through the active embodiment of self-acceptance and forgiveness. Nothing worth having externally can or will be birthed into being without it. Matthew 12:33 says, either make the tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt, for the tree is known by his fruit. So my interpretation of this particular passage indicates to me that the tree is symbolic of you and me, and it's been growing and tended to by the thoughts, words, and actions of us and our ancestors. So the question remains, are you willing to get compassionately curious about the history of your tree and the quality of fruit that it currently bears? And can you accept it in its current state, knowing that it grew the best it could, because only what you are not giving it can be lacking? And once you know better, will you now commit to pruning the fear that poisons and instead begin to cultivate the love that nourishes? In other words, are you willing to see it differently? As always, these are just the thoughts that are currently swirling around in my heart, and I figure if I'm thinking it and feeling it, others probably are too. We are really in a time right now of rest and digest, and when the external world starts to ramp up again, and it will, can we see it differently? Can we approach it differently? Can we add a different lens of compassion to how we interact with others? Can we see the relationship with others as a reflection of the relationship with ourselves? And can we see that relationship with ourselves as our relationship with God? Can we begin to identify when we are acting in right relation with God versus when we are in separation? So that when we believe that we are speaking our authentic truth and what's in our heart, that when it's not coming from an authentic place, when there is anger or resentment or fear inside of our words, can we begin to recognize that that is not our authentic nature, that is not our authentic self? And can we see it differently? Can we see what's happening around us and how we are experiencing it differently? See with our heart instead of with our eyes and our ears. This is all I have for now. Thank you so much for being here. And if anything you heard resonated or you believe it can be of service to others, please share this with your community, your family, your friends, on any of your social networks. And if you really want to help me out, give it a 5-star rating, leave a review or a comment on this episode wherever you're listening to it. The algorithm gods respond favorably to your interaction with this podcast, which means it will reach many more people. So again, thank you for being here. Until next time, I love you.